Gidan nan ba gida ba ne, matsala dai ne gidan haya. Gidan nan ba gida ba ne, matsala dai ne gidan haya. Duk wanda yake a gidan haya, Allah ba shi wuri ya yi nashi, ko babu kuɗin buga kwano ya samu ko shimci ya zuba sama.
Hello viewers, on today's session of Nigerian Law Documentary, we'll be looking at the legality of landlord increasing rent. Do landlords have power to increase rent? At least arbitrary, because at least 2 people have met me this year complaining of the way their landlord increases rent without notifying them and without knowing whether they have the ability to pay. So now, in giving my legal advice, in giving my legal opinion with regards to the powers of landlord to increase rent, I'll be talking from both sides. I'll be talking from both sides of my mouth because I'm a counsel. I'm a lawyer to be. I don't know which of them I'll be representing tomorrow in court. So it's better for legal education for both landlord and tenant to know their rights. So first of all, let's start with the right of the landlord. Generally, the landlord is the owner of the house. He is the owner of the land. And he who owns the land owns everything that is attached to the land. With plantato, so it applies. So when he builds a house and a tenant comes and rented the house, there is always an agreement, though not always, no formal agreement. But we are talking about, okay, when there is a formal agreement. When there is a formal agreement, the agreement contains the amount of rent payable by the tenant, and as well it contains the period for which the tenant is paying the rent. Good. So when a tenant is staying in the house, in the apartment for 1 year, and let's say the rent is 150,000 naira, during the period of that 1 year or during the period of that 12 months, the landlord does not have the power to increase rent. The right of the landlord to increase rent has been waived, or the landlord has been stopped from increasing rent during that period. The landlord only has power to increase rent when that period has expired or when it has lapsed. The reason why he doesn't have power to increase rent is basically because of the agreement they have entered. Good. That is the right of the landlord. Within that period, the landlord does not have right to increase rent within the subsistence of the tenancy. The landlord only has power to increase rent when that tenancy has come to an end and he wants, or the tenant wants to review the tenancy again. Then there should be a new agreement, and if there is going to be increase of rent, the landlord should make it known to the tenant, and if there is going to be reduction, which in most cases it's very unlikely, he should also let the tenant know. So after the period of 1 year, there is a new agreement, and the right to increase rent accrue to the landlord. But during the period, the landlord does not have right to increase rent. So the landlord has right to increase rent at the beginning of every tenancy, but not during the subsistence of the tenancy. Let's go to the right of the tenant. Well, from what we have said so far, we already know that the tenant has right to complain or to refuse to pay any extra rent increased by the landlord during the subsistence of his tenancy, when his tenancy did not come to an end. So a woman met me that her landlord has increased rent, like it doubled, in fact it tripled the normal rent she was paying before. She complained, what will she do? Like a fellow student told me, what will he do when his landlord increases rent from 50,000 to 150,000? What do you do? And I asked him, okay, if there is a formal agreement if there is a formal agreement that states the rent payable, the landlord does not have right to increase the rent during the period of that tenancy. But at the end, he has right to increase. However, in most cases, there is no tenancy agreement. So if there is no tenancy agreement, or if you want to draft a new tenancy agreement, assuming the landlord has already increased the rent, and you are scared that you know the landlord will increase the rent, subsequently the rent will keep on going high, it will keep on going higher, higher, higher. So what do you do to stop the landlord from increasing rent? Probably you want to stay in the house for 5 years, and first year landlord has increased rent, and you are sure next year landlord will increase rent. What do you do as a tenant? Here is an advice to you. When you are drafting the tenancy, state it clearly that you are staying in the house for 5 years. You are staying in the house. The tenancy will last through the period of 5 years, not 1 year. Do not agree to be a yearly tenant, because the landlord will increase rent at the end of every year. If you are a yearly tenant, and if you are a monthly tenant or weekly tenant, at the end of every week, the landlord has right to increase rent. So this is what you do. You make sure that you make it clear that you are staying in this house for 5 years. So you are a tenant for a term setting. You are a tenant for a term setting of 5 years. And you are going to pay a total, okay, you are going to pay a total amount of, if it is 50,000, you are going to pay a cumulative sum of 250,000. That is for 5 years. Every year 50,000. So you are staying for 5 years and you are paying a cumulative sum of 250,000. So the landlord does not have right to increase rent during that 5 years. So it's a continuous tenancy. It's not a tenancy, a yearly tenancy. So the landlord cannot increase rent after the end of a year, but he can only increase rent after the end of 5 good years. So you see, the tenant is at advantage. He's at a advantageous position, in the sense that he can stay in that house for 5 years and the landlord will not increase rent. This is a way out. And some tenants may likely not have that cumulative sum to pay immediately. Well, you can make it clear. It's an agreement. You can make it clear to him that you will stay in the house, okay, for 5 years, but for a cumulative sum of 250,000. However, you are not going to pay the money in a huge sum. You are not going to pay it in a lump sum, but you are going to pay it partly. You are going to make a payment by installment. That is to say, payment should be at the end of every year, but the tenancy should be a tenancy for 5 years. So this is the way out. Tenancy is for 5 years, not 1 year, but payment should be at the end of every year. You are going to pay 50,000 every year, and it will arrive at 250,000 after 5 years. So this is the way out. So the landlord cannot say you are a yearly tenant just because the mode of payment is yearly. What the court will look at is the duration of the tenancy. Is it for 1 year? It is for 5 years. Therefore, the court will likely pronounce that you are a tenant for a term setting of 5 years, not 1 year. So if you are not a tenant in necessity, you can implement this. You can make it to be a term of the contract agreement. So, like the student that came to me, he was very lucky that the landlord was not giving him a tenancy agreement. There was no tenancy agreement. So I advised him to create one and put that into the terms of the tenancy. And he came thanking me that the landlord has signed the tenancy and everything is over. He is a tenant for 4 years and the landlord cannot increase rent during that period. He keeps paying the same amount of rent every year, irrespective of whether the landlord has made any improvement or whether the rate of the dollar has gone high or inflation and everything. The rent still remains the same. So this is the way out for tenants, and as well, landlord have rights to increase rent, but tenants have a way of making sure that they curtail the right of this. And discussion has improved your knowledge of the law with regards to landlord and tenant. Thank you. expect more videos from me, more educative, interesting video from me. Thank you.